I know most of you know how to play chess, but in this video, this video is for chess phoenix fledglings who don't know how to fly yet. I'm going to be teaching you how to play chess. And I also want to do a special shout out to Mutti, my grandma, who hasn't learned chess yet, and I want this to be a video where she can enjoy all the rest of my videos more. And happy birthday, Mutti. So the very first rule in chess is the pawns. If you don't know what a pawn is, the pawn is this piece, 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 and this piece. They're on both sides. All of these are pawns, and all of these are pawns. All of the white first pieces are pawns here. So they all look the same, so they're all pawns. They look like little men. And what they can do is they can move forward. In the first move, they can either move one square, two squares, or they can move one square. This rule is only for the first move in the game. So let's just say I move twice, then it would be his turn. He would move twice, but then you can't move twice again. The reason why that is because the rule, you can't move twice again unless it's after the first move. See, there's only one dot, so you can only move one square, and he can only move one square also. So all pawns can do this. On the first move, they can move twice or once, and on any other move, they can't. If a pawn gets to the other side, which this is not a realistic game, but I'll show you an example. Let's just say he moves here. If a pawn gets to the other side, pawns can take diagonally. Look, keep pushing. If a pawn takes, see, now you can take the other pawn, since the pawn didn't take you. You can take it, and then his pawn's gone, and you're up a point. Then let's just say he moves here. You can take again, you can take his rook, which I'll explain how they move later, and promote to any piece. The queen is the most powerful piece, so you would promote to that. And now you have two queens in the game. So if this is too complicated for you right now, just finish watching the video where I'll explain all of the pieces and it will all make sense. And if you watch the video and don't understand it, you can just watch it again. Or if you still don't understand it after watching it again, just text me in the comments and tell me what's your question. So the next piece that we're going to learn how it moves, they move the same on both sides. So the next piece would be the knight right here. It's a horse. They can move like an L. They can jump over pieces. They can jump over the pawn, and they can move in an L shape. This website is really nice because it shows you the two squares that the knight can move with blue dots. So the only squares it can move are these two, since it moves in an L. It moves like this, and then like that. Just moves in an L. So in an L, the knight can move like that and land on this square. Or the knight can move like this and land on that square. And once it gets to this position, let's just say this other person moves his knight, then the knight has these three squares. It can either go back, forward, or here. So it doesn't really matter where you move. Oh, I forgot to tell you, pawns, they cannot move backward. And so the knights can move here, like in L's. They can move in L's anywhere. Like, it can move here. You could move an L there. He can move an L here. It doesn't matter as long as it's an L. And now I'm going to restart it. That's how the knights move. They move in L's any direction. They can move any sort of L. Like, it can, after your opponent moves, look at the options that the knight has. It has here, 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 here. All of those squares. This is why the knight is my favorite piece, is because it has so many squares it can move. and is very powerful when you can do forks, which I'll explain later. Well, I'll actually explain now. A fork is when, let's just say he moved, well, I moved here, and he moved here. I pushed a pawn, then he moved his king. A fork would be if you take the pawn, it attacks both the queen. Both squares it can attack is the rook and the queen. So it's attacking both of those pieces. I'll go more into forks later. So the next piece that we are going to learn is the bishop. To get the bishop out, the bishop cannot jump over pieces. This is the bishop, right here. It has the cross on it. The bishop cannot jump over pieces. So in order to get your bishop out into the game, push a pawn. You have to push the pawn, either 2 or 1. It doesn't matter. Then, after he moves, let's just say he does that, you can move your bishop along this diagonal. This is the white squared bishop. You see all these squares are white. Every one of them are white. So it can only move along the white squares. Even if it moves here, let's just say he moved his bishop, it can move along only white squares. See how many options it has? It can go here, 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 or here, or here, or here. It has as many options as the blue dots that you see. So you can move anywhere, and when it has this circle, it like takes the pawn. So bishops are pretty powerful, and this bishop right here, the one that I highlighted, is the dark squared bishop. So after you push your pawn again, let's just say he pushes his pawn and tries to copy you, your dark squared bishop can move on any dark square. So it can move along the diagonal where the dots are. Most games, unless you're playing on a website, if you're playing a normal chess game, it won't have the dots. So you're just going to have to remember the bishop that's already on the dark square is going to have the dark diagonal. So after you know that piece, these two bishops are opposite, like dark square, light square bishop, but the knights move the same. Even though they're facing they're on different spots, the knights all move in L's. One of the last pieces that I'm going to show you is the rook, which is the one that I'm highlighting now. After you push a pawn or do something to get the rook out, let's just say he pushes this pawn, you can move your rook. When you move your rook, it moves in any sort of straight diagonal. So I'll restart the game so it makes more sense. Here, now you can start. It's not really good to start this way, but if you want to move your rook out, it can go in a straight line until it reaches a spot where another piece is blocking it. This is its own pawn, so it can't take it. So it moves here. Let's just say the opponent copied you. You could move anywhere along this diagonal. You could move here. He could move here. You could even take this pawn, which is a bad move because then he can take back. So that's how the rooks move. They can move in straight lines anywhere. Like even all the way across the board. If there's an open straight line with no pieces in the way, they can move like all the way across. And the second to last piece that I'm going to show you is the most powerful piece in the whole game. After they push their pawns, remember pawns can move twice in the opening, the queen comes out. It is the most powerful piece in the game because let's just say that the queen can move on a diagonal like a light squared bishop. Let's just say it can go there. Now, the queen, after they move, look how many possibilities the queen can move. The queen can move forward like a rook and take this pawn. It can move here. It can move diagonal like a light squared bishop. It can move anywhere. It can move sideways like a rook. It can move the other direction sideways. And once it moves, let's just say it moved here and they moved, you could move like a dark squared bishop now. The queen is the most powerful piece because it can go, it's like combining the bishop and the rook together, light squared bishop and dark squared bishop and a rook together. That's the queen. It's the most powerful piece. So it can move anywhere pretty much except for it can't jump over pieces and can't move like a knight. The last piece that I'm going to show you how it moves, this is the same for both sides. Like this queen and this queen can move the same. The last piece I'm going to show you is the king, which has the little cross on the top. He's the most valuable piece. How you move the king is, I'm just going to move a random piece for them because you have to take turns moving. How you move the king can only move one square at a time. So I'm going to restart this. At the beginning of the game, if you want to move your king, which isn't very smart, you first have to push a pawn. Then your king can move one square forward. Their king can move one square forward. And now your king can move anywhere. The king can move anywhere, but it can only move one square at a time. Like if I wanted to go here and he wanted to go here, there's 4 squares he can go. He can't go forward right here. That's not an option because this pawn is aiming here. He's attacking there. And if the king moves here, then you automatically lose because the king is taken. So this website won't allow you to move there. So the kings can move anywhere one by one. Now that you know how all the pieces move, remember you can always pause the video or slow it to half speed or whatever you need to understand this. If it's too fast for you, you can always rewatch it or do whatever you need. Okay, the goal of the game is to trap the king. I'm going to show you an example of one of the most simple traps that you can do. It's called a checkmate. So, now that you know that the pawn can move up 2, the most common opening is 2 pawns forward. You know why? Because then the knight can move here, the other knight can move here, the bishop can move anywhere along the diagonal that it can move, and the queen can get out and the king can get out, but you really don't want to move your king. So, a checkmate is when, let's just say he moves his knight. Remember, knights can go in L's. Then you move your bishop there. Checkmate is when you check him when the king cannot move. A check is when your piece is attacking his piece. The queen, when it's touching the king, like this, it's touching the king almost. It's on the exact same square. It's checkmate because where can the king move? He can't move here. Can't move to that square, 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 and he can't take the queen. You know why? Because this bishop, this sneaky bishop, is guarding the queen using its diagonal. They're on the same diagonal, so they're protecting each other. If you don't understand this, I'll explain it again. If you do, you can just fast forward a little bit. The bishop, remember, it can move on the white diagonal. And when the queen takes, this pawn, right here, when the queen takes the pawn, when the queen takes this pawn, here's another version of it. When the queen takes the pawn, the bishop is guarding because they're on the exact same diagonal. The king cannot move anywhere, and no piece can take the queen. Now, I'll show you an example. What would have been a smart move for him is if he had moved his knight here, since they can go in L's. Then, when you try to take the pawn, it's totally losing, because the queen is the most valuable piece besides the king, and the knight can take it. Remember, knights can move in L's, and this is like a sideways L, so it can just take the queen. And now you just lost your most valuable piece and probably the game. So that's how bad it is to do that. You have to watch out for those knights. You have to watch out for those pawns that can take your queen. So now that you know what mate is when the king is trapped and he's in check. Here, I'll show you another example of check. That's check. You can hear the noise. You know why it's check? Because the bishop is aiming at the diagonal of the king. The white squared bishop goes on its white diagonals, right? And when the white squared bishop is attacking the king through the light squares, it's called check, because the king is on the diagonal that the bishop can move, and his only move Well, one of his only moves is to block with the bishop. Block with his bishop. Then you can always take, which is just trading because then he can take back. Every piece can take another piece. The pawns take diagonally. Look, like this. They take diagonally. The knights just take when they land on the square. Knights can move in L's. It just takes back. The queen can take when it moves on the square. The bishop can take once it gets onto the square. And the rook can take once it gets onto the square. An example would be like if you push the pawn here, the queen can take since it's on the square. It's on the same diagonal. But that would be a bad move because then the rook can take since it's on the same diagonal. So now that you know the rules of chess, I'll show you some simple openings. This opening is called the golden opening. If you can get in this position, you're really good. Let's just say someone does like this. You can push double pawn, and he does like that. If you put your knight out, pushes a pawn, let's just say he does all this. This is called the golden position. The reason why that is because, look, all these pieces are in their happy spot. The knight can move. This knight can move to here, to here, to here, to here, and here. Anywhere where there's an L, except for on top of its own piece. So those should be all the squares that the knight can move. That's a lot. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 squares. The bishop can move here. This dark square bishop can move here, 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 and here. That's pretty nice, right? That's a lot of squares. And the other bishop can do the same thing except light squares, only light squares. It has tons of moves. These pawns can move forward. This knight can move in a whole bunch of different spots. And the queen can move lots of places. It has the freedom to move. So you can see why this is the golden position, because there's so many opportunities for you to move, and it's just really nice because whatever he does, he's kind of trapped in. And the goal of the game is to get in a checkmate, and when he doesn't have much squares for his pieces to move, and you do have squares for your pieces to move, then it's easier to get him in a checkmate because you have more squares for your pieces. So, after this golden position, there's one more rule that you can do with the king and the rook. This might seem crazy, but it's called castling. What you do is, you see, now I said before that the king can only move one square any direction, except for this rule. You see that the king has two options, right? Here and here. It shouldn't have two options. But there's this rule called castling, that when you castle, it does like that. Want to see it again? Once you move the two squares, the rook jumps to the other side. You can slow this down if you want to see it slower. It jumps to the other side, and they switch positions. Now the rook is here, and the king is safe behind all of these pawns and the rook, right? And that's pretty good because the bishop is guarding your king here and here, and the knight is guarding your king. This is why this is the golden position. And your bishop is guarding your rook. So the next thing that you could do, instead of castling, you could move your queen up. Then let's just say he does something random, and then you can castle queen's side. Now look. Now you can castle left or right. So it looks like the king is in a really good position because he can move more squares than he's supposed to. But this is only the rule when you haven't moved your king yet. If you've moved your king, you're not allowed to castle. So when your king's still sitting in the street like a duck about to get run over, you can castle, and then he gets out of the road and is safe. So it doesn't matter which direction you castle. You can castle left or right, depending on the position. If he has lots of pieces on this side, on the queen's side, which he does, he has most of his pieces on his queen's side, so I would suggest castling on the king's side. If he doesn't have most of his pieces on this half of the board, then I would suggest castling queen's side. So it really depends on the type of position that you're in. That's pretty much how you play chess. If you have any questions or you need to watch again, you can always redo it, and text me in the comments if you have any questions. And thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And like a phoenix rising from the ashes, it doesn't matter if you win or lose or don't understand it. You will if you practice.